Have you ever stepped into a room and felt every heartbeat echo like a drum announcing fate? I walked into that stark, fluorescent-lit chamber with tension coiling around my shoulders and my pulse pounding in my ears. The space was small, its silence broken only by the relentless tick-tock of an ancient clock and the sterile hum of overhead lights. It reminded me of a courtroom where every gaze was laden with judgment, and each pair of eyes was ready to cast me out. I clutched my daughter Sophie's hand tightly. Sophie, now a brave 10-year-old with clear, curious blue eyes that mirrored my own hidden worries. I offered her a smile so fragile it could have shattered with one misstep. A smile meant only to keep her safe from the storm of reproach that swirled around us. "Rosalind, I see you still had the nerve to show up," came a cutting remark from across the table. The voice belonged to Isabella, my own sister, whose perfectly styled auburn hair and scarlet lipstick seemed to have been borrowed from a bygone era of lavish elegance. Her tone was soft yet sharp, a silken dagger meant to remind me of the past I'd tried desperately to escape. I tried to ignore the low hum of ridicule and the cold stares that filled the room. I seated myself on a lone chair at the far end of a long polished table draped in pristine white cloth. Opposite me, reclining with an air of superiority, sat Victor, my uncle, a man whose dry chuckle resonated like the final note of a somber symphony. He sneered. "I expected you'd have the decency to stay away, or perhaps come here to mumble a sorry farewell to your father." His words stung, a reminder that in the eyes of this family, I was nothing more than a shadow of the person I used to be. Sophie, petite and vulnerable, huddled her small hands around the worn edge of her dress as I slid into the chair beside her. I could see the flicker in her eyes, a search for refuge and reassurance. At that moment, every look around the table told me that the faces of those who once called me daughter, sister, or even kin were now unfamiliar and alien, as if I had been erased from their memories. The room was eerie in its precision. A cold library turned into an arena of old grudges. Faded photographs adorned the walls, but my image was conspicuously missing, cropped from memories like an unwanted blemish. I could almost feel the weight of every whispered remark, each hushed tone a reminder that I had been banished from the family narrative ever since I left the only home I'd ever known. My sister Isabella recounted the tale of my departure, a story as old as time in this family, a narrative spun with bitter threads. I had abandoned my ailing father when I left him and fled with little Sophie, not long after a harrowing emergency that followed my own fragile recovery from childbirth. They never asked why I chose to walk away from the chaos and heartbreak. They never cared that I left with my heart broken and my infant daughter clutched tightly in my arms. I glanced around trying to piece together fragments of happier memories from my youth. A childhood interlaced with laughter over fishing trips with my father, Albert Grayson, who had been both my mentor and my adversary. In that very room he had once taught me the art of unraveling a tangled fishing line, urging me to look closely at life's little details. Yet now, every photograph, every relic had been doctored to exclude me. It wasn't long before Victor, leaning in with a sinister calm, let his disdain seep into his voice. "It is clear, Rosalind," he rasped. "Your father's testament is final. Did you really think a confession or a word of apology could mend what you've done?" His words, aimed squarely at my soul, reverberated in the silence that followed, solidifying the truth that I was now an outsider among my own blood. I responded not with words, but with the quiet, determined strength that had kept me afloat through years of isolation. I was not here to beg forgiveness or to plead for a place at the table. I was here because my daughter, because Sophie, deserved to know the truth. The next moment was like a pause in a heartrending play. Victor's sardonic chuckle receded as Charles, our father's steadfast attorney, entered with deliberate, measured steps. His leather briefcase, heavy with secrets and legal weight, clicked across the floor with each step. He nodded briefly to everyone but lingered just a moment too long when our eyes met, a silent calculation that suggested he knew more than he let on. Everyone seemed convinced that I had come to confirm my insignificance, that I would beg silently for some remnants of approval that had been long withheld. But the truth was I was here for Sophie. She had whispered to me just the day before, "Mom, if Grandpa still remembers you, you need to know what he truly felt." Her words, a quiet command, had ignited a determination within me that I could no longer ignore. Charles set his briefcase down and began to unfasten it carefully. I watched him open its worn leather flap, revealing documents that seemed to pulse with a gravity that matched my heavy heart. There was no sympathy in his gaze, only a stark assessment as he scanned the room and prepared to read aloud the final will, a document that promised to redefine everything I thought I knew about my family. As he began, the atmosphere crystallized into something almost tangible. Each word he spoke resonated like a verdict, punctuating years of prejudice and pain. With a tone both measured and cold, he declared, "I, Albert Grayson, being of sound mind, do hereby divide my estate as follows." The words fell like heavy stones in the silence, each syllable hammering home the reality of my exclusion. I sat frozen, listening as Charles recited the predetermined fates for each member of the family. Isabella's eyes sparkled with a twisted satisfaction as her inheritance was read. A grand home, an expensive heritage. Victor, in his customary manner, claimed the lakeside retreat and the prized fishing boat. Even Gabriel, my once belittling cousin, nodded as he was handed a collection of vintage automobiles, a symbol of status and legacy. Then the moment came that I had long dreaded. The document reached the line meant for me. My heart clenched so painfully that I thought it might shatter. To my youngest daughter, Rosalind Grayson, I leave no part of this estate. A cold silence descended over the room, punctuated only by the soft scrambling of a chair as Isabella suppressed a laugh. Victor's mocking smirk deepened, and I could see in their eyes an unspoken confirmation of everything I had feared. The narrative that had always painted me as the ungrateful outcast was now etched in black and white. I was, in their eyes, the squandered daughter, a relic of past failures. Sophie squeezed my hand, her wide eyes absorbing the gravity of the moment. Though she did not fully understand the undercurrents of familial betrayal, she sensed the depth of my despair. I murmured reassuring words to her, words that belied the unspoken pain churning inside me. I had expected a muted acknowledgement of my fate, a quiet resignation in the face of destiny. Instead, the turning point came with a simple, yet seismic interruption, a moment orchestrated by the child I had raised with nothing but love and hope. Sophie, unassuming and brave, turned suddenly toward Charles as if drawn by an inner compass. Her voice, soft yet insistent for a 10-year-old, broke through the stifling silence. "You forgot the recording." In that single moment, the cascade of memories and hidden truths began to unravel. Every eye in the room, Isabella's, Victor's, and even Gabriel's, shifted, caught in the shock of an unexpected revelation. I stared at Sophie, my heart pounding anew, as she fished a slightly crumpled white envelope from her small backpack. The envelope, sealed with brown tape and adorned with familiar bold handwriting, looked as though it had been kept safe through all the storms of my life. "Where did you get that?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling with dread and hope. "With the resoluteness of someone far older than her years," Sophie replied. "Grandpa gave it to me the last time I visited him. He told me to give it to Charles if things ever got ugly." Her words, tender yet filled with the weight of ancient secrets, struck me like a bolt of lightning. Charles's eyes widened ever so slightly as he carefully took the envelope. The room tensed into a new gravity as he broke the seal. Within, he discovered a small, sleek black USB drive, and a folded handwritten note that looked as though it bore the signature of a long-lost love and regret. His expression, usually the impassive mask of a seasoned lawyer, softened with an emotion that hinted at a regret too deep for words. Clearing his throat, Charles began to speak in a voice that was no longer purely legal but laced with somber confession. "This is a video recording made by Albert Grayson, intended for a moment of dispute." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over everyone. "And I believe that moment has now arrived." Isabella scoffed and Victor murmured something about fabrication, but no one could take away the palpable shift in the atmosphere. I felt the tide of my life changing as every secret, every rejection, and every small moment of hope converged at that singular instant. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat, summoning the fortitude required to withstand what might come next. All for Sophie, who deserved to know the truth. As Charles connected the USB drive to a laptop, the room gathered in an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the soft, rhythmic beeping of the machine booting up. The screen flickered, and soon a recording began. There, in the familiar study of my childhood, sat my father, Albert Grayson, dressed in a light brown cardigan, a cardigan I had once given him. His silver hair, neatly combed, and the old, kind yet troubled eyes that had so often looked past my rebellions, now were fixed directly on the camera. His voice, heavy with remorse and unspoken love, began the final confession. "Elena," he said, using the name I had never truly been called by my family, "if you are watching this, then I must confess, I made choices that have pained you. I once believed the things others told me about you, that you were unworthy of love and loyalty. But now I see the error of my ways." His voice wavered as tears glimmered in his eyes, and I felt as if time itself had paused to listen to the truth he struggled to confess. The recording revealed years of quiet regret, of a father who in his final moments had wrestled with pride and loss. He admitted that while my departure had been seen as betrayal, it had been born out of a desperate need to survive a lifetime of unrecognized sacrifices. He spoke of the long nights when I had suffered in silence, holding my daughter close in an apartment that felt as cold as the stares of relatives who had abandoned us. And as his words rippled through the room, every harsh judgment melted into something resembling compassion. "Tears do not undo the past," he said softly, "but they can water the seeds of tomorrow. I am proud of you, Elena, for having the courage to live with your truth. I leave you the legacy of my love. Not a house, not money, but a promise. That you are seen, you are loved, and you are never alone." His final words, filled with a bittersweet tenderness, left me trembling with both sorrow and relief. In that charged moment it became unmistakably clear. The long-held narrative of abandonment and contempt was crumbling under the force of a father's long-overdue apology. The atmosphere shifted profoundly once the recording ended. For a fleeting instant, the room remained suspended in silence, a collective exhale as if the very air was processing the shock. Even Isabella, who had once brandished laughter as her shield, looked stripped bare of all pretense. Victor's stoic mask faltered, and even Gabriel, whose earlier nods of conformity betrayed his true self, lowered his head with evident regret. I sat quietly, still holding Sophie's hand, feeling the raw tides of emotion surging beneath the calm veneer I had maintained for so long. In that moment I realized that I was not here to reclaim a ruined inheritance. I was here to reclaim my identity. I was here to listen, to truly listen, to the truth that had been long hidden by bitterness and fear. Charles, with a gentleness I had never associated with his stern professionalism, assured us, "The revised will has been or will soon be distributed to all involved. Everything is now legal and final. It's not about fairness, it's about truth." His words, though matter of fact, carried a warmth that lent me hope. As I slowly rose from my seat, memories cascaded through my mind like vivid flashbacks. Endless nights of struggling in a cramped apartment, the sound of Sophie's soft cries echoing in the dark, the quiet determination that helped me forge a new life in the outskirts of a bustling city. I recalled every act of quiet defiance, every moment where I had chosen survival over despair. And now, as I walked toward the exit, I sensed that something irrevocable had shifted in the fabric of our family's legacy. Outside, the setting sun bathed the stone steps of the once dreaded mansion in liquid gold. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of fresh rain and new beginnings. I paused at the top of the steps, looking back one final time. The house, once a prison of rejection and sorrow, now held a tender invitation, a call to return not as a burden, but as the person I had always been meant to be. I turned to Sophie, who met my gaze with an unspoken promise. "Do you want to see Grandpa's old study?" I asked softly. For a moment she hesitated, a blend of curiosity and caution shining in her eyes, before nodding gently. "Not today," she replied, voice a whisper of strength and relief. "Today I just want to go home with you." With that, we stepped away together, leaving behind a room once filled with cruelty and judgment. I climbed into the waiting car with a resolute determination. As I caught a final glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes still misty with unshed tears but now steady and free, I knew that today marked the beginning of a reawakening. I was no longer the unacknowledged daughter, the discarded remnant of a family that had once shunned me. I was Elena, a woman reborn in truth, forging a future built on the lessons of pain, love, and resilience. In the twilight of that unforgettable day, as the car wound its way through softly illuminated streets, I allowed myself a moment to reflect. The echo of my father's final words mingled with the muted hum of passing cars. The fierce sting of rejection had begun to dissolve, replaced by a profound acceptance of who I was. and what I had overcome. I remembered the countless nights spent in a cramped apartment on the edges of the city. Nights when the quiet was broken only by the distant whistle of a train or the soft tapping of rain against the windowpane, and every crevice of my being ached for the warmth of belonging. I recalled how I had painstakingly saved every spare coin, mending old sweaters and scribbling dreams on scraps of paper, all for Sophie, who was the beacon that pulled me from the darkest of times. Every step I now took was a silent declaration that I had reclaimed not only my inheritance but, more importantly, my identity. The scars of the past, a tapestry of misunderstood sacrifices, silent struggles, and the heavy weight of familial judgment, had become the very stitches that wove my newfound strength. I was ready to build my future, one where truth was the foundation and love was the guiding light. In the days that followed, I began to reconnect with those parts of myself that had been left behind in the haze of loss. I reached out to old friends, embraced new opportunities, and even rediscovered the joy in the simplest moments, like the soft giggles of Sophie as she played in our tiny new apartment, or the gentle reassurance of warm sunlight streaming through a window in the early morning. I even found solace in the healing company of a kind-hearted neighbor, Mr. Bennett, who shared with me stories of his own long journey through loss and ultimately, self-discovery. Each day was a quiet celebration of survival. I committed to carving out moments for reflection, a long walk in the park where the rustle of autumn leaves spoke of change, or evenings where I would sit with Sophie, recounting stories of a time before we had to hide our true selves. In those moments I realized that every heartbeat, every tear, and every smile was proof of the resilience of the human spirit. I learned that the truth, however painful it might be, has a way of setting us free. And in that liberation there was a rebirth, a chance to define ourselves by our strength, not our scars. A new dawn of reconciliation. In the weeks that turned into months after that fateful day, the echoes of our family's painful past began to soften under the gentle persistence of time. I found myself invited, hesitantly at first, to quiet gatherings that once felt like battlegrounds of recriminations. Conversations began to emerge, tentative exchanges full of cautious hope and buried regrets. I remember one brisk, dew-laden morning when I received an unexpected invitation from none other than Gabriel, once the cousin whose silent disdain had been so palpable. Now his note, scrawled in an unfamiliar yet sincere handwriting, spoke of a desire to mend old wounds. "Elena, let's meet beneath the old oak tree by the creek. Perhaps it's time for the truth to be healed by forgiveness," it read. With a gentle resolve I accepted, knowing that the path of reconciliation was fraught with uncertainty, but guided by the promise of inner healing. The day of that meeting was colored with the soft lavender hues of dawn. In the clearing by the creek, the air was filled with the gentle rustling of leaves and the rhythmic murmur of water over smooth stones. There I met Gabriel, not as the remnant of past conflicts, but as a man whose eyes revealed a sincere longing for forgiveness. We spoke for hours, our voices intermingling with the sounds of nature, each word a brick in the foundation of a tentative truce. Gabriel confessed how the old tales of my supposed betrayal had weighed heavily on his heart, and how witnessing the truth in the recorded message had opened his eyes to the injustice we all had been a part of. Our conversation wandered from bitter memories to playful recollections of childhood, a time when laughter was effortless, and the bonds of family, though unpolished, were unbreakable. I recounted my own struggles, the sleepless nights, the uncertain mornings, and the relentless pursuit of hope for Sophie's sake. In return, Gabriel shared his journey of learning to question the narratives handed down by older generations, narratives that had too long defined us without ever capturing the fullness of our truths. This unexpected moment of connection marked the beginning of a broader awakening. It wasn't long before more family members, quietly burdened by their own regrets, reached out. Isabella's icy facade began to thaw ever so slightly as she, too, started speaking of memories that had been overshadowed by bitterness. Even Victor, the imposing figure whose words had once seemed final, began to express remorse for the cruelty of his judgments. The long-forgotten nuances of our shared history were slowly being brought back into the light, allowing for a shared space where truth, healing, and reconciliation could finally take root. In our little community of survivors, we started organizing small family reunions, not extravagant events dictated by duty, but humble gatherings where everyone could share a meal, reminisce over old photographs, and allow the silences of the past to give way to genuine, heartfelt conversation. There were moments of laughter that surprised us all, as if the ghosts of our grievances were finally stepping aside to let real emotions breathe freely once again. Through these reunions, I learned that reconciliation is not about forgetting the past, but about reweaving its torn threads into something resilient, something that honors both our shared sorrows and our collective victories. Sophie, with her gentle wisdom beyond her years, became a symbolic link between old wounds and new hopes. In her curious questions and unguarded smiles, we all found reasons to believe that beneath the layers of hurt, there was a capacity for profound love and acceptance. I began documenting these moments in a journal, the way golden sunlight pierced through dusty windows, the soft murmur of conversation under a starlit sky, the smiles that slowly replaced hardened expressions. Each entry was a testament to the fact that even the deepest fissures in our hearts could be filled with empathy and understanding. This journal, I would later share with those who still doubted the transformative power of forgiveness, hoping it might serve as a roadmap to healing in their own lives. As the leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold that autumn, my own heart transformed too. I realized that while the past had sculpted who I was, it did not have to imprison me. I had, through my struggles and my victories, earned the right to define my future, not as a victim of old lies, but as the bearer of a truth too powerful to be silenced by sorrow. By the time winter crept in with its quiet, reflective chill, a new chapter had undeniably begun. I embraced the role of not just a survivor, but of a healer, a woman who had experienced the cruelty of rejection and the bittersweet liberation of truth. And in that transformation, I witnessed firsthand how broken bonds can eventually be mended with time, genuine dialogue, and the unyielding courage to face the past honestly.